There's a particular feeling that some people carry for most of their lives. Not sadness. Not loneliness. Something stranger than that. It's the feeling that everyone else received a map to life that somehow never reached you. You notice it early. You're sitting in a classroom surrounded by other children, and although you're physically there, part of you feels like you're watching from somewhere outside yourself. Everyone else seems to understand the rules. How to act. What to say. What to care about. And you're still trying to figure out why none of it feels natural. As you get older, the feeling doesn't disappear. It simply changes shape. You watch your friends find their groups, their identities, their direction. And somehow, no matter where you go, a small part of you continues to feel like a visitor. Not rejected, not unwanted, just different. If you've felt this for most of your life, there's a chance you've spent years believing something was wrong with you. That maybe you're too sensitive, too thoughtful, too quiet, too aware, or simply too different to ever fully belong. But what if that feeling isn't a sign that you're broken? What if it's a sign that your mind has always worked differently? Carl Jung spent much of his life studying people exactly like this. Not people who were sick. Not people who were defective. But people whose inner worlds were so rich, so complex, that they often struggled to fit into a world built for simpler answers. Jung believed that some people don't experience life by moving through it. They experience life by trying to understand it first. While others ask, "What should I do?" these people ask, "What does this mean?" And that difference changes everything. Because when your mind naturally searches for meaning, certainty becomes difficult. You don't simply accept the roles you're given. You question them. You don't easily follow social expectations. You examine them. And you don't become who other people expect you to become. You spend years trying to discover who you actually are. From the outside, this often looks like confusion. Like hesitation. Like being lost. But internally, something very different is happening. Your mind is trying to solve a problem that most people never stop long enough to notice. Who am I when nobody else is telling me who to be? This creates a kind of loneliness that's difficult to explain. Because it's possible to be surrounded by people and still feel like you're speaking a language nobody else understands. Not because you're better than them. Not because you're worse than them. But because you're paying attention to different things. You notice contradictions. You notice hidden emotions. You notice when people say one thing but feel another. And after a while, you begin to realize that what feels invisible to everyone else feels impossible to ignore for you. And that's when the real question begins. What if you've never felt like you belonged because you were never trying to become who everyone else became? What if you've been trying to become yourself? There's something that happens when you've felt different for a very long time. You stop expecting people to understand you. Not because you've become cold. Not because you've given up on connection. But because explaining yourself starts to feel exhausting. You've spent years trying to put certain feelings into words. Why crowded places sometimes leave you drained. Why small talk can feel strangely empty. Why everyone else seems excited about things that don't move you at all. And eventually, you stop trying to explain. You simply smile and say, "I'm fine." But underneath that answer, an entirely different world exists. Psychologists have found that people who are highly self-aware often experience life differently. Their minds don't just absorb experiences. They analyze them, Question them. Turn them over again and again. And while this deeper processing can lead to incredible insight, it also creates distance. Because it's difficult to feel fully present when your mind is constantly searching for meaning. Carl Jung believed that some people are naturally oriented toward their inner world. They don't simply live their experiences. They reflect on them. They ask why they feel what they feel. Why people behave the way they do. Why certain moments affect them so deeply. The problem is that our world rewards certainty. It rewards quick decisions, quick opinions, quick identities. And people like this rarely move quickly. Because before they choose something, they want to know if it feels true. And that can make life look very different from the outside. Your 20s may feel confusing. Relationships may come and go. Friendships may feel difficult to maintain. You might constantly compare yourself to other people and wonder, why does everyone else seem to know who they are? But here's something nobody talks about. A lot of people who seem certain about themselves aren't actually certain at all. They've simply learned how to perform certainty. They've learned which version of themselves receives approval. And they stay there. The people who feel different often struggle because they can't do that. Something inside them refuses. You almost become the person everyone expects you to be. And then something feels wrong. You almost follow the same path as everyone else. And something inside you quietly says, this isn't it. And because you listen to that feeling, life often takes longer. You start later. You change directions more often. You spend years feeling behind. But Carl Jung believed something remarkable. He believed that becoming yourself is one of the rarest achievements in human life. Because most people never ask the difficult questions. They simply inherit an identity. But some people can't do that. They need to know. They need to understand. And that process can feel incredibly lonely. Especially when everyone around you seems to be moving faster. The strange thing is, many people who feel different aren't actually disconnected from others. They're often deeply connected. They notice small changes in people's moods. They sense emotions that others miss. They understand pain because they've spent so much time sitting with their own. And yet, despite understanding people so deeply, they often feel misunderstood themselves. That paradox creates one of the deepest forms of loneliness. To understand everyone else, while feeling like nobody truly understands you. But maybe that's because you've been measuring yourself against the wrong timeline. Maybe your path was never supposed to look like everyone else's. Maybe the years that felt like confusion were actually years of becoming. And maybe the feeling of being different isn't evidence that you don't belong. Maybe it's evidence that you're still becoming someone uniquely your own. If you've spent most of your life feeling different, there's a good chance you've also spent most of your life feeling behind. Behind your friends. Behind your family. Behind the version of yourself you thought you would have become by now. You watch people around you build careers, relationships, identities. And part of you quietly wonders, what happened to me? Why does everything seem to take me longer? Carl Jung had an answer to this question that was both uncomfortable and strangely hopeful. He believed that some people are simply not designed to become themselves quickly. Not because they're incapable, not because they're broken, but because the process of becoming who they truly are requires more time. Jung called this process individuation. The lifelong process of becoming the person you were always meant to be. And according to Jung, it's one of the rarest things a human being can accomplish. Because becoming yourself requires something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. It requires uncertainty. It requires loneliness. It requires letting go of identities that made other people comfortable. And for people who have always felt different, this process often begins long before anyone else notices. While others are busy building a life that looks successful from the outside, you've been building something much harder to see. An internal life. A way of understanding yourself. A way of understanding the world. And from the outside, that can look like nothing is happening. But inside, everything is happening. Psychological research has repeatedly found that some of the traits most strongly associated with long-term wisdom and emotional maturity don't peak in early adulthood. They develop slowly. Self-awareness, emotional regulation, judgment, the ability to tolerate uncertainty, the ability to understand other people deeply. These are not early life skills. They're lifetime skills. And suddenly, something strange begins to happen. The very traits that made you feel different when you were younger start becoming strengths. The overthinking becomes insight. The sensitivity becomes emotional intelligence. The loneliness becomes self-understanding. The years spent questioning yourself become wisdom. And for the first time, you stop asking, "Why am I different?" and start asking, "What if being different was never the problem?" Because maybe the people who feel different were never falling behind. Maybe they were simply traveling a different road. A road that takes longer. A road that often looks confusing from the outside. But a road that leads somewhere many people never reach. A life that actually belongs to them. Carl Jung once wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who other people expect. Not who earns the most approval. Not who fits in the easiest. The real you. And perhaps that's why you've always felt different. Because some part of you refused to become someone else. Even when it would have been easier. Even when it would have made life simpler. Even when it made you feel alone. So if you've spent years believing that you don't belong, maybe the truth is something much stranger. Maybe you were never supposed to. Maybe you weren't meant to fit into a world that required you to abandon yourself. Maybe all this time, you weren't lost. You were becoming. And perhaps one day you'll realize that the thing you spent your entire life trying to fix was actually the thing that made you who you are.